would like to thank the organizers of the World Tobacco Asia Conference and Expo for the opportunity to present. Today we embark on an exploration of the global regulatory environment for tobacco amidst pending updates and intricate consequences. Grasping the continuous transformations in this regulatory terrain is indispensable for the future prosperity of the industry. In the European Union, the TPD was initially announced in 2014, and it's now up due for an update. When the TPD was originally introduced, it took a couple of years for each member state to translate the directive and implement it into each member state's national law. The TPD is a guideline law, then it's up to each member state to implement it. For example, we have the UK's TRPR 2016, the Tobacco-Related Products Regulations. So that was the UK implementing the Act for the Tobacco Product Directive. So that's kind of how this works. And then within the TPD, there's a time limit stipulating when they have to kickstart a review cycle. And it's way overdue. I haven't seen any drafts on the revised TPD, but certainly within the next year or so, we will have a new tobacco directive. And then the member states will take another year or two before they enact their own law. Then typically what we see with the Tobacco Products Directive is some countries copy it verbatim, then they're done. And other countries will have little desires that they want to see in their e-cigarette tobacco regulations, so they're going to add details of their own country's regulations. For example, Germany will no doubt add a banned list of ingredients or extend the current banned list of ingredients. Some other countries may go above and beyond that, but some may just keep things exactly as they are listed in the TPD. They can use this TPD guidance as a bare minimum standard, but they can also choose to go beyond it. And so it's really, you've got to look around at what's happening in the e-cigarette and tobacco products in general. It's not certain if additional standards for cigarettes will be implemented, but given what the US has suggested with the low nicotine levels, we may see additional cigarette regulations as well. It's fairly certain that we will see a ban on flavors because of everything that's happening right now with disposables, youth access, and flavors. Additionally, we may see some kind of regulation on disposables. Ideally, a mandatory recycling plan will be enforced. As for nicotine pouches, we will likely see these falling under regulations in the very near future. It is still unclear as to what restrictions will be placed on all forms of nicotine products, but rest assured regulations are forthcoming. If you want to impact the impending regulations, the best way to do so is to have your consumer advocate for your products. There's a great story that was told by Clive Bates at GFN in Warsaw that illustrates the effectiveness of consumer advocacy. He talked about the history of tobacco control and e-cigarettes in the last 20 years or so. One thing that changed TPD was a ton of vapors marching on the European Parliament, puffing plumes of vapor in the air and saying, "Do not ban these products whatsoever, or we will not vote for you." And it made the European Parliament change their minds. They softened the e-cigarette regulation that they had initially drafted. So for any company, mobilizing their consumers is potentially going to get a better outcome for everybody. The UK implemented its version of the Tobacco Products Directive in 2016, and that's still in place. It hasn't changed for the last 7 years. However, the government is now supposed to bring out new guidelines in November. It seems that the government is considering regulations on disposables, as many countries are. This could be an outright ban. However, it seems that the UK government is being influenced by groups such as Action on Smoking and Health, who understands the goods of the disposable vapors are going to be for adult smokers. But I have no doubt we will see some kind of environmental restrictions, whether this is recycling programs or something similar to New Zealand, where the e-cigarette batteries have to be removed. This way you can recycle the battery and make the whole recycling of the e-cigarette easier. It's clear that e-cigarettes are being sold all over the place with absolutely no oversight of where these cigarettes are being sold. I believe the government will clamp down on this and on what happens when somebody is found selling e-cigarettes illegally, either selling them to underage people or selling cigarettes that are not notified, e-cigarettes that are not notified. Because right now, it's about £20 fine, slap on the wrist, and then off you go. UKVIA is advocating for a minimum of £10,000 fine for retailers caught selling illicit new e-cigarettes. And I think that the government will probably listen to that and see that it's actually not a bad approach. Let's make sure that we're not making the products illegal, but if they're sold illegally, then we punish the people for it. So time will tell. We have another couple months to wait till the government announces what it's going to do, but I suspect a total ban is unlikely, but the last 3 bullet points are most likely to happen. The illicit trade market is negatively impacting the e-cigarette industry. People bringing illicit e-cigarettes on the market are potentially introducing harmful compounds like lead and formaldehyde and other potentially harmful compounds. This information comes from 2 firsts. While China produces approximately $11 billion worth of e-cigarettes a year, very few of these are sold in China because it's so challenging to sell e-cigarettes in China. Most of these products end up in the US, the UK, and Australia. Unfortunately, a portion of these products are entering the markets without following the individual country guidelines. These products are causing the problems that we're seeing right now with the illicit trade in the US, UK, and other countries. The largest problem is with the illicit products that come in youth-friendly packaging, like making your vape look like a soft drink with a straw, or a youth-friendly flavors like cotton candy or a fruity cereal. There's no argument that this particular product is attractive to young people. It is these types of products that are detrimental to the vapor industry. To help combat these problems, the Chinese State Tobacco Administration wants to clamp down on production to make sure that anything coming out of China is of good quality. I'm not sure what kickstarted this regulation, but this action from STMA is a positive sign that the first step to combat the illicit trade market is happening. The big question then becomes, how will this new law be enforced? Currently, it's basically a self-governance policy where you self-register. I am fairly certain that the large manufacturers like S'more and Relax will follow the new guidelines and do things correctly. However, since the regulation falls under self-governance, smaller manufacturers may choose to ignore the rules. It also is yet to be known what the consequences of not following the guidelines are. I am hopeful that this new regulation will begin, and that if somebody is caught not in compliance with the new guidelines, that they will be punished. But we don't know what's really going to happen, so it might change the situation, but we're not sure yet. We've got the FDA now. This is everybody's favorite regulator. 2 things here. The FDA put out a proposed rule on menthol last year. We are still waiting on comments about that. The second thing is that they said they would offer a nicotine ceiling, but they have not gotten around to this yet. There is no nicotine ceiling for cigarettes or e-cigarettes. These are 2 of the main things that are happening, along with the Reagan-Udall report and the FDA decision-making and reviews on PMTAs. The thing with the menthol rule and the nicotine ceiling is that there is simply no way that the major cigarette manufacturers are going to let them do this. If they do, I guarantee you that there will be lawsuits initiated against the FDA. This is what the tobacco companies do. Take the graphic health warnings, for example. This issue was in the courts for about 10 years before the courts finally ruled against the FDA. So what will happen next is anybody's guess. No matter what will happen, it's going to happen very, very slowly and will be decided in the lower courts. Recently, 22nd Century put their low nicotine cigarette company up for sale. In doing so, research was done that indicated that the Tobacco Control Act implies that the FDA cannot implement a low nicotine rule. It is up to Congress to do that. But again, this just indicates that the process the FDA has to go through will not happen quickly. So combustibles are going to be present on the US market for many years to come, and the big tobacco companies are going to carry on making money from combustible cigarettes. The FDA said it will complete its review of the remaining 189 covered applications by the end of the year. A covered application is a new tobacco products that were on the market as of August 8, 2016, with a PMTA filed within the deadline of September 9, 2020. This is a result of the lawsuit from the conglomerate of anti-tobacco groups that sued the FDA. I'm not sure what will happen if they do not comply. Will the FDA just try and negotiate, or are the courts willing to listen, or will they simply demand that the FDA complies? And what happens if the FDA does not comply? I simply do not know. We have one exciting thing is that Brian King wrote a letter that was published in the Journal of Addiction. This acknowledged the presence of a continual risk with cigarettes at one end and nicotine replacement therapies at the other end, and e-cigarettes sitting in the middle. And then that's the only time that we've actually heard from the FDA since the Gottlieb days back in 2018. That is an indicator of progress in FDA thinking. But with that said, they've still only given 23 e-cigarettes marketing granted orders, and all of those have been tobacco-flavored products. The FDA understands that e-cigarettes are reduced risk products, but they don't want to issue a marketing granted order for flavor products. Additionally, they keep telling manufacturers if you want to sell flavored products, you need to demonstrate that flavored products are more effective at helping smokers quit than tobacco-flavored e-cigarettes. Otherwise, we won't give you a PMTA marketing granted order. That's almost impossible to show without performing a large study, because the difference is negligible. If you give a group of smokers tobacco-flavored products and a group of smokers a fruit-flavored product, you might only see a 10% difference, and therefore you need a significant sample size to statistically separate the two groups. While the FDA has focused on e-cigarettes, oral nicotine has just been pushed to the back of the queue. It seems a little unfair, and it affects a lot of small manufacturers, as well as the more prominent manufacturers that sell pouches. One segment of the industry recently won a battle. The premium cigar industry is no longer regulated by the FDA. Now they are not subject to the same oversight as other tobacco folks. Whether this is widely seen or not is debatable, but we see this as a victory for science. The FDA has a lot of scientists of them in Maryland, but it just doesn't let them make decisions, and it doesn't let them help when they review PMTAs or when they're developing new rules. However, the courts do understand the science and can take the time to review it. Obviously, the FDA is under political pressure, but courts are not to the same degree. The court's ability to understand the scientific arguments is a good sign for those companies who are currently under active litigation to reverse their marketing denial orders, because the courts will listen to and understand the scientific arguments they make. It's a very positive thing. On to Brazil. Anvisa plans to implement new regulations at the end of the year. E-cigarettes have been banned in Brazil for years, but you can still get them on the illicit trade market. It is unlikely that Anvisa will lift this ban. Even if it were lifted, they will likely ban flavors, tax them like cigarettes, and make you put warning labels on the packaging, and make you not use them in public places and things of that nature. We could even see a nicotine ceiling similar to Europe. However, the illicit trade will continue to carry on in Brazil. In Australia and New Zealand, this is very interesting. The two countries are clustered in that corner of the world, have diametrically opposing views on regulating e-cigarettes. Health New Zealand is promoting the use of electronic cigarettes as a way for people to stop smoking. Australia has a prescription-only model where you can only get an e-cigarette from a licensed physician. The number of physicians willing to prescribe e-cigarettes is less than 10% of the physicians in Australia, so a very low number. And so what can you do in Australia? You can get them through the illicit trade market. And that's the way it works pretty much everywhere. But this illicit trade is making government a little bit worried. And I think they will consider even more robust regulations. But again, even if they regulate more strongly, it does not stop this illicit trade. You can mandate that your e-cigarettes come in plain packaging. That won't stop them from selling your cigarettes in non-plain packaging, because they're simply not going to listen. The Australian government has announced that they're considering even more severe regulations. COP10 from the WHO. COP10 stems from the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. It's a biannual meeting where health ministers or whoever the government sends from each of the countries that have ratified the FCTC all come together and decide what they will do about tobacco. And historically this was, okay, let's put graphic health warnings on cigarettes or put cigarettes in plain packaging. They talk very little now about combustible cigarettes. The COP10 will focus mainly on e-cigarettes, but will also look at some featured tobacco products. And we'll expect to see what we see elsewhere as bans on flavors. They're interested in bans on salt liquids, and they're also interested in this nicotine flux idea. Nicotine flux is the amount of nicotine per puff you get when you use an e-cigarette device under standard conditions. It restricts the amount of nicotine transmitted through the device to the end user. This idea stems from the US, specifically from Tom Eisenberg. The idea will undoubtedly be at least discussed, if not considered. There is a lot of discussion about the WHO and how it demonizes vaping in the same way it demonized combustible cigarettes. They're not separating vaping from combustible cigarettes in any way, and because of this, governments may consider putting e-cigarettes in plain packaging, add graphic health warnings to the packets, restrict public use of vape products, and things of that nature. The European Union would like the WHO to tell them what to do. However, countries implementing any regulations will take some time for those changes to be implemented. But it's going to happen, particularly in the smaller countries which do not have large regulatory bodies. The only way to standardize is to ensure that products fall within set limits. For instance, decades ago, the European Union put restrictions on nicotine tar and carbon monoxide in traditional cigarettes. And now they may begin considering limiting the output of nicotine in e-cigarettes. However, people can simply take more puffs to receive the nicotine level that they desire, or they can block the vents with their fingers to receive more nicotine. But enacting such restrictions through regulations make regulators feel good. So when they return home from their meeting, they can say, "We will make our citizens healthier." Now let's take a broader outlook. There are likely to be so many regulations and restrictions placed on e-cigarettes in the next 2 or 3 years around the world that one simply fears for the category and for public health. The more restrictions placed on e-cigarettes, the more youth and others turn to illicit market products. Sooner or later, countries will come down on this, but they will not likely be able to completely eliminate the illicit e-cigarette market. Hopefully the Chinese regulations will help, but we have not caught up with the problem in time. Just a few weeks ago, France was mentioned that it was considering banning flavored e-cigarettes and disposable vapes. It's a bit ironic that so many countries are considering banning so many versions of e-cigarettes and then will choose to turn around and begin selling nicotine replacement therapy as a treatment for vaping addictions. We don't need a treatment for vaping addiction, and we certainly don't need an ineffective treatment like giving 100 vapors some nicotine gum as a replacement, because of those 100 vapors, approximately only 6 of them would actually be able to stop vaping on account of using the gum. It's most likely not going to improve public health by any significant degree. And then there are the smoking cessation medications. These only help about 20% of the people who try it. For others, the side effects make them simply feel bad and do not help them stop smoking. Most people who want to try these medications genuinely want to stop smoking, but for some they have the habits that are preventing them from successfully stopping. This is where vaping helps, especially since it's proven safer than combustible cigarettes. Any company interested in bringing a medicinal product to the market through the MHRA in the UK simply needs to develop a product that delivers less nicotine than a cigarette, but more nicotine than the Nicorette inhaler. Once you do that, you can get a license. And of course, you have to do some safety assessments and some quality assessments, but it's not a huge burden. And then in contrast, if you are attempting to get a nicotine prescribed in an e-cigarette, In the US, it's a horrendous undertaking. First, you literally spend hundreds of millions of dollars to run an FDA medicinal program to develop an application for e-cigarettes to help people stop smoking. But even though the FDA knows nicotine doesn't cause cancer, they say it many times. They still create a very tall bar to bring medicinal nicotine products to the market. Because of this extreme challenge, companies are looking to the UK as a possible route to market. If you want some type of support impacting your own country's regulations, it may be best to put together advocacy materials to help shape the regulations. This could include a critique of the available science or execution of behavioral studies or something similar. It's time we focus on the science and work towards eliminating the illicit market. If we do not, the whole industry will implode and not exist within the next 10 years. Thank you for your time.